Welcome back to Sharpen the Point. We begin our look at the ACC, breaking down what each team is losing, returning, and bringing in for next season. Today, we're going to take a look at a Boston College team that has dropped to the basement of the conference, an emerging Cal program, and a Duke team coming off of a title game appearance that I quite frankly believe was undeserved given their results out of conference, but they kind of luck boxed their way in, and I'm appreciative of it because, managed to get JMU in the playoff, and I appreciate that. Starting things off with Boston College, quite frankly, Bill O'Brien is probably on his last legs at this point. I don't know what his future holds, likely a coordinator position somewhere potentially, but the drop-off has been precipitous, certainly from his time with the Houston Texans, where he looked moderately capable of being a long-term head coaching solution in the NFL. Now he's got a 2-10 team that lost its quarterback in Dylan Lonergan, who I thought played better than he got credit for. Bob has had some massive mistakes with his quarterback room dating back to the Thomas Castellanos issues, starting Grayson James inexplicably multiple different times, even though he was kind of a failure at FIU and Keon Jenkins was a much better player. It's just this room stinks. Point blank. Lonergan's now gone. James is gone. Thank goodness, because now he can't play him. And I would say you're likely turning to Grayson Wilson, the former 4-star Arkansas transfer, in hopes that he ends up being the answer potentially. But he wasn't the answer at Arkansas. They had Taylon Green. He just kind of sat there with the new coaching staff. He was never going to be an answer in the long run. So I would expect that Grayson Wilson is the one who ends up taking the reins here. But the likelihood of this being successful is highly doubtful. Running back wise, Turbo Richard got most of the work a year ago. He's now moved on to Indiana. He'll play in a somewhat backup role, in my opinion, to Kobe Martin. Not exactly the best back in the world for my money. He was decently efficient, got about double-digit touchdowns, solid out of the backfield, but overall the offense kind of held him down as well. Jordan McDonald is a guy that should be decent in this backfield, but I would expect it to be Jordan McDonald might not even be there, to be honest with you. I think this thing's not updated properly. I think that overall the top two backs in the room will end up being Evan Dickens, the Liberty transfer, decent playmaker, 1,300 plus yards, 15 plus touchdowns previously at Liberty, although that is facing a porous Conference USA defensive set, similar to what Cam Cook was able to take advantage of. And then Nolan Ray, who has shown flashes at Maryland, but was definitely not the guy. He was never going to be the guy. So I don't think that either one of these guys is necessarily an upgrade. Dickens is maybe fine as a complementary piece here, but the run game is definitely a downturn off of the Turbo Richard room that they were able to rely on a year ago. Wide receiver-wise, very similar situation, right? Lewis Bond, I was a fan of. I thought he was a good player overall, a guy that has decent short area ability, able to work through the zones. He's a first read guy. He fit the mold of what the Edelmans and Welkers were able to do in those Patriot offenses. Bond was very similar. He worked well in that role, and he was complemented well by a big target in Reed Harris, who has just continued all spring so far at Arizona State to get rave reviews. I think he ends up having a big season there. He's a guy that is highly capable and will be sorely missed as a downfield, big, deep threat target. Granted, I don't think they have a quarterback to take advantage of this anymore. Him and Lonergan would have fit beautifully together. Returning, though, I would say the top returning player for me is Jaden Skeet. Jaden Skeet does have some capability to be able to move around the offense a little bit, a more lower ADOT type guy. I think you end up seeing him be the number one. The only challenge he could have in that situation outside of the quarterback play is going to be from Reed Swanson, transfer out of Colgate. I think they're going to try to utilize him in the Reed Harris role, given his 6'6" frame, nearly 1,000 yards a year ago in at Colgate. And we've kind of seen those guys be able to translate fairly decently from that Ivy League schools. There's quite a few that we're going to end up covering as the top transfers for these three schools. But Swanson gives you that big target to pair up with Skeet as the top two options. Maybe a Dawson Pooh ends up replacing the Lewis Bond role potentially. I think Skeet's in the running for it as well as the top target earner, with Swanson getting more of those, getting those 70 targets, let's say, from Reed Harris with some upside week to week. Outside of them, it's fairly bleak, I'll be honest. Tight end wise, we've got a little bit of nepotism with Chudzinski over here. He's likely to be the top option in this offense. They're going to want to feed him the rock. He had a good freshman season for a young tight end, a guy that was splitting time. To get 40 targets and 24 catches, over 300 yards, 4 touchdowns as a true freshman is nothing to scoff at, I would say. So I think that they're going to end up utilizing him a lot more in this offense, given the target earning ability of Lewis Bond and Reed Harris is now out of the room. Offensive line wise, it was not a great unit in my opinion. They graded out fairly decently, but outside of Michael Krontz returning at center, it is a full line change over here. Robert Smith IV is likely to get a guard spot. He's a guy that should step right in. It shouldn't be too much downturn off of that. But there is also questions outside of that. So you're looking at one guard spot being taken up, a center spot being taken up. Both tackles need to be replaced. One guard needs to be replaced. Likelihood, Reggie Jackson coming over from Jacksonville State to get one tackle spot. And then you're going to have some competition with the Christian Phillips coming over from Michigan State, Owen Snively out of Eastern Mich, both having options to be able to step into that guard role, creating a little bit of competition. They needed depth because they lost a lot up front. I think it's ultimately going to be a struggle for this entire offense overall, given the quarterback play and lack of playmakers in the running back roles. It's going to be a long season putting up points here for Boston College. Defensively, they were decent. I will say they were decent defensively, tackling wise, but they graded out horribly against the run, against the pass, awful pass rush, and most everybody's gone. I like the Demetrius Ballard pickup out of Buffalo. That was a stout defense off the edge. I think he has some upside. Alex DeGrick is another Ivy League transfer as an edge. He will definitely be a starter for them right out the gate. He comes over from Harvard, had a solid season a year ago, 6 tackles, plays well. He has a projectable frame at 6'4", 230-ish, so a little bit lankier, skinnier off the edge, but they're going to need to add a little bit of weight to him to be able to hold up in the run game. Otherwise, I'd just run right at DeGrick personally and make him try to hold an edge specifically against these other ACC power offensive lines. Defensive line going to be a problem. I'm going to pick on it early in the season with some run game, mainly because the linebacking core is changing over too. And if you're changing out linebackers, you're changing out defensive linemen, I think your front seven is going to struggle. And now they're going to rely upon Anthony Polano out of Washington State. He played fairly well a year ago. He wasn't the prize target of that unit, though. Justin Medlock out of SMU, fine player as well. Potentially those guys will end up pairing up to be the top options in the room, unless Griffin Collins can really take a step forward after his true freshman season where he got his feet wet a little bit. Defensive back room, I think they're going to be a little bit better on the back end by comparison. Loss of Omar Thornton to Miami is going to be a bit of a issue for those guys. They didn't really bring in anybody that I'm too excited about, so they're kind of going to run it back with this group they had a year ago. I think you can pick on them, but that's not the weakness. I think they just get run on overall early in the season. So the likelihood is that Bill O'Brien doesn't have a job come next season. It's just point blank. I don't see this as a team that could even make a bowl game. It doesn't really matter. This is going to be one of, if not the worst team in the ACC, without a doubt, depending on the schedule and where they get teams overall. Now, moving on to much more exciting news. This is probably the belle of the ball for this this trio of ACC teams. The algorithm lines up for these guys to be pretty daggone good. Tosh Lupoi takes over a nice situation, given the Jaron Q Sagapolatele situation. I like this kid. He showed a ton of moxie as a true freshman, had a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. I would like that to improve slightly. He's not the most mobile guy, but he gets it done with his legs when you need him to. And man, did he play well as a true freshman. I think we see growth out of him, and this team continues to get better. And Lupoi is able to rally these guys. He's probably a guy that was involved a bit or been around Sagapolatele a hair, with him being at Oregon and Sagapolatele originally saying he was going to go to Oregon, committing there. So I think Lupoi kind of knows what he's getting into, and he's got that situation running well. I like the running back room. It's very interesting to me because of the Kendrick Raphael coming off of such a good season. Like overall, he was more of a volume play. I played him a good bit in DFS, caught the ball fairly well. It was a good pickup, and he did the job of what they needed. Coming over from NC State, he was never going to be an explosive runner. He's more of a kind of grinded out, get 3 to 4 yards a carry pretty safely, and has a high floor, low ceiling type guy, right? But he's reliable. He now moves to SMU, which I find interesting that they were able to do, that he ended up making that decision to move, given the upward trajectory of this Cal team overall. But they did a fabulous job of replacing him. So getting the replacement for Adam Muhammad, who I was shocked left Washington. I completely expected Adam Muhammad to take over the Jonah Coleman role, be the number one and the top option on a good Washington team who has a good young quarterback, a good coaching staff, and is in a big conference. I got to think they paid Muhammad pretty solid to take this role. And I think he gets the full Kendrick Raphael experience. And I think Ashton Emery ends up being his backup and just kind of like plays in the background and takes, let's say, a Brandon High, LJ Johnson type role. LJ Johnson, we will famously remember from his time at SMU when he could never get on the field and never stay healthy, and or I believe he was eligible most of the time, but I'm not going to quote myself on that. I don't want to perjure the man or be liable for slander here. There was a guy at SMU at that point in time that could not stay eligible. I'm just pointing that out. But I think Adam Muhammad's a star in the making to an extent. I think you see him be able to operate very similarly to the Jaden Ott first year in the ACC, where he was ACC Player of the Year. That's the type of player that I think you're getting. I think Adam Muhammad, is, so long as he is healthy, has the capability to be one of the top 3 backs in the ACC. And when you pair that with a Sagapolatele who has the capability to be a top 3 quarterback, all signs point to long-term success here. Now, we do have some changes in the wide receiver room, which are going to matter. Jacob DeJesus was an absolute target fiend and ended the season with, I believe it was double-digit catches, not targets, double-digit catches each of the last 4 or 5 weeks. I mean, he was plug play on DraftKings with his catch ability and just racking. He'd get you double-digit points just in catches before you even started factoring in any of the yardage or touchdowns that he was able to get you. So replacing him will be quite difficult. And then you add in the number 2 wide receiver being gone, Tron Grizel, who was more of a big body, similar to the Reed Harris situation. He's now gone. I think Quayron Adams ends up taking on some of the DeJesus packages because he's a similar build, similar mold, very explosive with the ball in his hands. He's a guy that can take on some of those packages. I think Jordan King plays a little bit of a role. Mark Hamper plays a little bit of a role. But the stars of the room have to be Chase Hendricks coming over from Ohio. He was the number one target for Parker Navarro for multiple seasons. Very talented wide receiver, multiple 1,000-yard seasons. He's a guy that can do some inside and outside work and probably pick up a lot of that DeJesus slack. Now, the Grizel stuff is probably going to Ian Strong. Slightly disappointed that he left Rutgers. He would have made a great pairing and kept with KJ Duff. But Ian Strong, I think, could be the one in this team if JKS continues to take strides forward. Strong is a very talented outside wide receiver, a bigger body, and gives a different element to the offense that they lacked a year ago. He's a much better version of Tron Grizel. So I think that it is feasible for Ian Strong to have a 1,000-yard season. I think it's feasible for Chase Hendricks to have 8 to 1,000 with, both reaching about 100 targets more than likely. I think the combination stays very similar with the top two being about 200-ish targets, 230 targets. And I think that most of that flows through Hendricks and Strong, with Adams seeing an uptick into the 50, 60 target range as well. This team's a team that's going to be able to throw the football, and they're going to want to rely on JKS's arm. And I think a lot of it's going to come down to the tight end play. Some of the wide receivers might end up losing targets to an extent, and I'm interested to see how the target share works out early in the season, because Mason Minnie was kind of a target that JKS really liked as a tight end last year, played very well, and I thought was an ascending talent. And then they went out and got New Mexico tight end Dorian Thomas, who is a very, very skillful wide receiver at the tight end position. 77 targets at New Mexico, almost 10 yards per reception, 4 touchdowns. I think he pulls some work away from Minnie, and we don't get that ascension. I think maybe they split time and they're both useful pieces on random weeks. But more than likely, given the talent in the wide receiver room, given the talent of Mason Minnie, it's going to be difficult for Dorian Thomas and Mason Minnie to have consistent production. Whereas if it was just one of them in the room, I would feel pretty good about either one of them being an 80 target guy individually with upside for 600 yards and 5 to 7 touchdowns potentially. Offensive line wise, they did lose some transfers, but they had replacements for the most part that can step into those roles. Tyson Ruffin's returning at center, perfectly capable player. Vadakani returning at right guard. They do lose Leon Bell to the bag at Colorado, lose Braden Miller to Duke, lose Nick Morrow to Kansas. I think Frederick Williams is the likely candidate to be able to step into a spot given his playing time a year ago and his size capability. And then Khalid Tafai is likely to get a tackle role in this spot. And then we'll have to coming over from Minnesota, and then we'll have to see what Michael Ravis does from FIU. I would project him more so to slot into a guard position potentially. But they do have some guys like a Bastion Sweeney that could step into the guard role as well, depending on what they would like to do. Offensively, I think Cal is going to be very explosive, very good. They've got weapons all over the place. JKS has plenty of toys. As long as they protect JKS well enough, they're going to put up a ton of points and be a very fun team to watch. It just all is, we'll end up looking at win totals here in the near future. What does their travel schedule look like? That will matter to me, because given the all coast conference that the ACC has become instead of being the Atlantic Coast Conference, it matters what Cal, how they have to travel overall to see what they're going to do. Defensively, okay unit a year ago. TJ Bush was able to get after the quarterback. He now moves on to Minnesota. They lose some other guys along this line and Ballers, Victor. How do they build? How do they rebuild, right? Derek Wilkins returns. He'll be able to play some of that center of the defense stuff. I kind of like what Lupoy did, though, going out and getting projectable guys. He's a guy that's been able to recruit some of these fellas. He's a defensive minded coach. He's going to know what he's looking for. And I like that he went and got some of the depth from Oregon because he had a hand in bringing these kids in. He's seen them every day in practice. And that tells me he wants to build around some of these guys. So you look at a Jericho Johnson, former 4-star defensive tackle. There's not really any room on that Oregon defense, which is super stout this season, for these guys to play. So he can offer playing time right away. I think a Jericho Johnson is a fabulous pickup. And I also like the edge pickups of Solomon Williams out of Texas A&M, projectable talent there, and Joshua Pierce out of North Texas. We kind of saw a little bit of that talent peek through last season at North Texas. So bringing those guys over is going to give him some high upside capability off the edge. Pairing with Wilkins and a Jericho Johnson gives him plenty to work with along that defensive line unit, although I do think it is a slight step back from what they had a year ago. Linebacker-wise, we all know the Luke Farrelly story by this point. That was the linebacker that split, went to Clemson. Dabo ended up yelling at Pete Golding, given that Golding kind of poached him away. That kid's a stud, and disappointing that he is not on this defense anymore. Also lose out on Ulave going to BYU, Ryan McCulloch going to UCLA. They're going to end up relying back to a Jaden Wayne who had a very nice season a year ago, in my opinion, rushing the passer. 6'5", 255 gives him that edge presence. He'll be able to help out there a good bit. And we get another Oregon transfer. I think this kid ends up stepping right in right away, along with the Waynes. Hampton, Aaron Hampton probably gets some playing time right out the gate. And then Kamar Motuti coming over as a depth piece from Oregon. I don't mind that these guys didn't play because he knows what he's getting from these guys. Tuatele, guarantee you, if he went to USC, they recruited him at Oregon more than likely. So he knows what he's kind of getting out of these guys. I think Lupoy's playing the long game here, playing the smart game, getting some younger guys that he kind of knows to be able to provide some stability to this defense. Secondary was decent a year ago, pretty solid. Brent Austin, former James Madison Duke, had a decent year, but really the top corner option that had a hell of a good year was Hezekiah Massis. Him now gone after his 5 interceptions. Big replacements at the cornerback spots. Lose out on Drew Polidor, now gone as well from the safety position. Do manage to keep a true freshman safety in Aiden Manitai. That is going to be a massive help for them on the back end. And then similarly, bring in a Ricky Fletcher at corner. He's going to need to step up big time in order to be able to play a role potentially here, along with Groves Killebrew coming over from Arizona. They needed cornerback help given what they lost. They went out and got some safety. Kingston Lopa coming over with Lupoy from Oregon. He got some of his guys at all 3 levels, which is going to end up helping them out a good bit. Michael Hurst, got to keep an eye on transferring up as well. He's a safety. He's got good experience. He's a guy that I think could end up slotting into the Polidor spot, but there's going to be plenty of competition for those safety roles. Overall, less confident in the defense, but they're capable of winning shootouts. So I do like the offense a ton. I don't love the defense, but you got to have faith in Lupoy that he's going to be able to put this thing together. Sleeper contender, Cal is. Manny Diaz had Duke humming a year ago. They were disappointing in the non-con overall. If they just would have won their non-con games, let's say Tulane, let's say UConn, that was a game they should have won. That was a fun game, though. That 37-34 game against UConn was one hell of a fun one. But they would have made the playoff. Fact of the matter is, though, they lost games they shouldn't have lost. So they ended up letting JMU in the thing. They managed to win the ACC title. I think they peaked, and that was kind of the peak, even though the record doesn't say it was the peak. And this is lined up for pure disappointment. Henry Bellin left knowing that Darian Mensah was the starter, and Henry Bellin wanted playing time. Problem is after Henry Bellin left very, very late, Miami said, "Oh crap, we don't have a quarterback," and they went out and paid a bag for Darian Mensah. Mensah coming off of a monster season, 4,000 yards, 34 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. It was going to be near impossible to replace him, and it became extra impossible when it's the last domino that fell, and they were stuck with Walker Eget or hoping that somebody out of nowhere, Chandler Morris, would become available. So Walker Eget is a gunslinger who's going to turn it over too much and has zero mobility. He's basically a poor man's Anthony Calandria, and that's not a good thing. So I think they end up struggling massively at the quarterback position, and it ends up being the thing that holds these guys back from being a moderately decent team. Because fact of the matter is, I think Nate Shepard, the running back, is probably the most talented running back in the ACC. The kid's an absolute superstar. 1,100 yards a year ago, he would have had 20 touchdowns if it wasn't for Anderson Castle just being the goal line vulture. Because Anderson Castle stunk, but goodness gravy, he could find the end zone. But Nate Shepard was explosive, and people did not recognize how good he was early in the season. He could catch the ball. He could run it. They're going to end up having to rely on him. I think they give CJ Campbell, the Rutgers transfer, formerly of FAU, more of the Anderson Castle role of the grind inside the 10 type stuff. And Nate Shepard kind of keeps that explosive capability on the outside with his, basically 6 yards a carry. He's going to break some 70-yard runs. He's going to be the guy that's going to have to be the engine for the offense and protect them from trying to rely on Walker Eget, whereas before they could really rely on the arm of Darian Mensah to give some pressure. I think Shepard probably struggles, though, because every team's going to end up keying on him and not having to worry about Walker Eget, forcing Walker Eget to beat them. Wide receiver wise, one of my favorite wide receivers, if you know anything. I was hyping the crap out of this kid coming into last season. Cooper Barkate. I played the hell out of him. He was amazing. He had 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, was extremely good. And he split with Mensah to go to Miami. I'll be honest, I think he's going to end up being the best wide receiver on Miami. That's a hot take. That probably is too hot of a take. Malachi Toney, everybody loves. I just don't think Malachi Toney has that extra gear. We're going to get to it when we talk about it. I shouldn't even divulge into that argument. That's a hot take, but I'm just going to say it. I love Cooper Barkate, and I'm going to wax poetic about him when I get to the Miami part. Quayshawn Brown was fine in the slot. They kind of had a 3-headed monster behind Barkate. It was Barkate as the 1 period with a dot, and then there was a 2A, 2B, 2C with Quayshawn Brown, Samir Hagans, and Antrell Anthony. All 4 now depart. Not quite sure why Quayshawn Brown split to Virginia Tech. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But hey, buddy, you do you. Now, what they did to try to replace Cooper Barkate and or replace all the other guys more than likely is they went out and got Javon Nicholas from Charlotte, who's fine. He's a slot player. He was the Quayshawn Brown replacement. I think they wanted Richardson to play with Barkate on the outside with Javon Nicholas in the slot. And then you get, another guy like a Jaden Moore trying to work his way into this situation because they were expecting Barkate and Richardson on the outside. What you have now is Jared Richardson needing to replace Cooper Barkate. Similar profile. If we remember, Barkate came over from Harvard. Jared Richardson is a 6'2", 200-plus pound wide receiver coming from Penn. Very similar players. 1,000-yard season a year ago, double-digit touchdowns. I think he can do the job. I just don't trust Walker Eget to get the job done like Darian Mensah was able to do. So Nicholas, fine player, not great. Richardson, good player. I think not necessarily on the Barkate level, but we'll have to wait and kind of see there. I do have some faith, more faith in Richardson, though, than many would probably at this point, given what has happened. They're going to end up relying on a guy that I played the crap out of, Jeremiah Hazley, late in the season. He was great late in the year. Came on very strong, worked well with Mensa. I don't know that they're going to be able to get the same level of production. Like I said, just don't trust Walker Egan. So if you told me we were running this thing back with Mensa, Shepard, Barkate, Nicholas, and Richardson with Hazley, I'd be like, all systems go. They're going to win, 7, 8, 9 games again. They should have won 9 last year, but they're going to win 7 to 9 games more than likely with that setup of skill players, because they're going to be able to play decent enough defense to be able to do it, given the track record of Manny Diaz. Problem is like Walker Egan is such a downgrade that it is worse of a downgrade than when Tennessee got Joey Aguilar and you were like, okay, like if they had gotten Alonzo Barnett, I'd be like, okay, well, maybe they have a chance. That's somewhat my purple colored glasses trying to tell me that, but they replaced Landon King with Nate Kursky. That's fine. It's whatever. It's behind Hazley. Hazley's going to play the most, no doubt about it. Bruno Fina, decent player, tough, not a terrible loss, but a loss nonetheless at left tackle. Right side of the offensive line, Brian Parker, that is the big loss. And Justin Pickett, both gone. Probably end up replacing some of these guys in-house, like a Bradley Smith. He rated out well. Matt Craycraft's going to anchor this line again. More than likely, I would see probably Bradley Smith and Jordan Larson at the guard spots, maybe a Jimmo Allen mixing in. And then the tackles, they went out and acquired Braden Miller from Cal and Nick Del Grande at left tackle is going to plug and play. Coastal left tackle, he will struggle some. He had some struggles. I know I pointed out every video. I've seen Coastal play enough, specifically against James Madison, where we just absolutely destroyed their souls along their offensive line. They just couldn't block anybody. Sahir West had a freak show day against Del Grande. So yeah, he rates out pretty well, but that when he faces off with a Sahir West or a talented rush end, he's going to have some struggles, no doubt about it. Defense took a step back last year, but they were able to mask over it due to how good the offense was to an extent. They were giving up points left, right, and center. They were kind of winning more shootouts. Problem's going to be is if they end up in those same shootouts this year, I just don't think they can get there. They were rushing the passer well. They did get home plenty. Manny Diaz being able to draw some things up. But now you got Wesley Williams, Aaron Hall, Vincent Anthony, and Josiah Green all departing, and that's 18 sacks. That's bad. That does not look good. Owen Waffle's going to have to do some work in the middle, and they're going to have to hope that some of these young kids, these sophomores, are going to be able to step right in and do some work. Hope that Bryce Davis is able to develop off the edge, the 4-star true freshman from a year ago. He got plenty of playing time in order to be able to get up to speed and used to it. They do have some young depth, so I do like where they're at as far as how they're positioned. I will buy into it based off of how good and talented Manny Diaz is at being a defensive mind. Linebacker-wise, they're still solid with Luke Murgott in the middle. That is going to be massive to be able to hold on to that. You do lose the other two in Jaden Francois and Trey Freeman, but Kendall Johnson played plenty a year ago to be able to step right into a starting role. And then the question will become who joins him. I like Bradley Gompers long-term. I think his upside long-term is pretty big, but he's probably slated to take over maybe in a year, but maybe he ends up getting some early stuff here. He is a talented player. So I'm interested to see what happens with Bradley Gompers as far as whether he can crack the rotation this season right now. Lose the corner, top corner, Chandler Rivers, very talented cornerback that you didn't really want to throw on. Lose Caleb Weaver at strong safety. Did like Caleb Weaver coming in the season. Knew he would do a job out of Sam Houston. He was a great pickup last year. Both talented players to lose out on. So now replacing those guys is going to be something to look into. Landon Callahan and Kamari Robinson returning at corner will help given the experience they were able to gain a year ago. And then Deshaun Stone's going to give him a safe presence on the back end, big thumper at strong safety. So he will be able to help as well. You got to like the pieces that are still there. They're going to need the depth at corner, so they did go out and get Dylan Flowers from Western Kentucky, Evan Smith out of Northwestern, even though Smith has not played very much. North Texas, they do get the safety, Patrick Smith-Young. I believe he probably slots in next to Deshaun Stone more than likely, although I did crap on him going to North Texas, given how terrible that Old Dominion secondary was the year before. That ended up proving true. The Old Dominion guys were awful transfer pickups. Shocker when you give up massive amounts of yardage. I would say overall, I think Duke takes a step back. I wish they wouldn't. I like if they just could have retained Mensa and Cooper Barkate. This is a team that's competing for, top end of the ACC. As it stands, given the Walker Eget situation, given the loss of Barkate, given some of the turnover along the front, even though I think it's still going to be pretty solid, given the secondary guys that are now gone with Chandler Rivers, Caleb Weaver, which are probably, in my money, the top two guys in the secondary, you're probably looking at, you might end up with the same record, but it's not going to be near as pretty or feel as good. I think somewhere between 5 and 7 wins, depending on what the schedule ends up looking like, which we'll end up going over in the near future, is the most likely outcome. It's just not going to feel good, and it's not going to look pretty because it's going to have to be in an ugly, ugly way. You're going to have defense going to have to step up because Walker Eget and relying on that arm is not something I ever want to do.